We can see a graph from Newzoo and Yahoo that shows esports revenue from 2012 to projected revenue in 2022. And you can see in 2012, esports revenue was 130 US dollars in millions, all the way to 2019, where it's projected to be almost 1.1 billion dollars US. And then you can see 3 years later, that's supposed to jump all the way to almost 1.8 billion dollars. So from 2012, so basically a full decade, you can see from 130 to pretty much almost 1.8 billion dollars. So now that we've talked about revenue and why should we care, let's talk about the demographics. As you can see, this first graph on the left is from Nielsen, and it shows us some of the demographics for U.S. esports fans aged 13 to 40. We can see that 75% of esports fans are male, with 25% of them female. And these fans spend about 3 hours a week watching or participating in esports, and then also about another 7.5 hours weekly playing video games. The key one is this bottom right one, where you see the average age of the U.S. esports fan is about 25. But then you also see in those bright red boxes that 75% of U.S. esports fans fall into that millennial category, that 18 to 24 and then 25 to 34. So the very important demo that hotel and gaming property says this is our next wave of customers. And you also see Gen Z right behind that, 13 to 17 with 15%. So, esports, basically they're younger and this is where they are, but this is obviously a very key demo. You see on the graph on the right, it shows the number of hours spent watching esports videos worldwide from 2012 to 2018. In 2012, the number of hours was about 1.3 billion hours watched. And then you can see all the way to 2018, that number is skyrocketed to 6.6 billion hours of time spent watching esports video worldwide. Just think how much that content is, 6.6 billion hours. And what an advertising message could be just a tiny, tiny fraction to that. We've discussed a few times during our class about millennials aren't coming to casinos to gamble. Why aren't they coming? Well, we can see that millennials are flocking to esports. And so this is one way a gaming or hotel property could try to attract millennials to their property by, partnering up in the esports world. And we'll get some ideas, as we talk about this more and more. So let's talk about non-traditional advertising. A study was done by the McCarthy Group in 2018. And they concluded that 84% of millennials that were interviewed responded that they did not like traditional advertising, as well as that they didn't even trust it. So not only that they didn't like it, they didn't even trust the messages they were giving, so they were tuning it out. We also see that millennials are not watching TV as much as previous generations have. Deloitte conducted a study that said millennials ages 22 to 35, that 88% of them subscribe to internet video, while only 51% of them subscribe to pay TV. And then you can see Gen Z ages 14 to 21, where 80% subscribe to internet video and 57% subscribe to pay TV. So you can see just where these millennials, where they're spending their time, most of them cutting, they've cut the cord, they're watching internet video, they're streaming, they're not watching pay TV. One last note from a survey done by a company called Defy was that 85% of millennials that responded said that they regularly watch things on YouTube. So this is where they're spending their time, 85% watching things on YouTube. So we can see from the data that traditional advertising, like advertising on TV shows or commercials, billboards, magazines, would not be anywhere near effective to the new generation than it was for the current and previous generations. So for esports, how can companies attempt to advertise to the groups that watch esports? So, if traditional methods aren't working, how can we reach the esports customer? Well, let's discuss a few options. The first one here isn't really an option, but is a key point before looking at the other ones. Whatever company that decides they want to look at this esports, we need to understand the esports customer that they're going after. And when you think of esports, it's kind of this one huge umbrella. But underneath that umbrella, there's smaller communities based on the game. So for Game A has a community, Game B has a community, Game C has a community. And even though they're all kind of similar, they all potentially might have different wants and needs based on the games they're playing, the ages, and so forth. There are many different game types and games out there, so obviously we know each group can be different from the other. It doesn't all fit into a one-size-fits-all box, so understanding the customer and their wants and needs will definitely be the first key way to understand advertising to them. So the first idea would be to advertise on the right channels. These channels would be YouTube, as we talked about earlier, but also Twitch and other streaming sites. Twitch is one of the biggest streaming sites, around the world. They report that the number of unique daily viewers to its site is 15 million per day, and that the number of monthly users is about 140 million per day. Twitch also notes that the average user spends 95 minutes per day on average watching streams on Twitch, and that the United States accounts for over 20% of the web traffic to the site daily. So just think about that for 1 second. 95 minutes per day on average watching streams on Twitch. It's a lot of time watching esports. Our second method would be to potentially start an esports team or sponsor a current one. As esports has grown, more teams wear custom jerseys for when they play, like what you would see athletes wear, in soccer, in the NFL, in the NBA, Major League Baseball, and so forth. These jerseys contain logos for companies so that any promotional materials or coverage of the team would show the logo. I've got two pictures here to the right of jerseys of esports team, and you can see in the upper picture that the Volkswagen logo is easily visible, and in the bottom logo you can see the Monster Energy logo, as well as they've got a couple others. Our third method would be to potentially sponsor current esports influencers that stream and play on Twitch or YouTube. Instead of a team, these would be just one individual. Not all esports are on teams. Some of them just stream just so they play like on their own. They're not a part of any teams. They're not doing big tournaments, but they are streaming while they play. It would basically be similar to sponsoring an influencer that is on Instagram or Twitter. There would be opportunities for logo placements, video ads, partnerships that can be used to market to the followers and viewers of the influencer. And then finally, the last method would be to create and/or host esports tournaments on properties. As I mentioned earlier, that big esports events can be seen similar to conventions in that they last multiple days, and people will travel from around the country and sometimes from around the world to attend them in person. And sometimes you might see all these people that are coming from around the world that these aren't countries we potentially might market to anywhere else. So we're getting our brand out to people that might not find our brand anywhere else. So in March of 2018, the Luxor here in Las Vegas opened the first esports arena in the Las Vegas Strip in a partnership with Allied Esports Entertainment. It's got gaming center, a broadcast center. It's got plenty of areas so people can come watch or play their favorite esports. They do things like boot camps, trainings, just a way for the community to come together, play, watch, hang out as a social aspect. One interesting note on their earnings call to talk about quarter 3 2019 earnings, Frank Ng, the CEO of Allied Esports Entertainment, said that in-person revenue was up 17% in the third quarter. And he attributed that increase to the HyperX Esports Arena in Las Vegas, because this is basically their crown jewel, their biggest one they have going. So you see in Vegas, esports has a home, has a permanent home, not just like if you were going to build something in a ballroom or a convention area. So now let's talk about sports betting. So in May of 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a federal law that was enacted in 1992 that would enable U.S. states to legalize gambling in their state. Previously, the only state that sports betting was legal was in Nevada. So if you wanted to make a sports bet, you either had to travel to Nevada or find an illegal bookie to take your bet. So not many great options. So with that law struck down, multiple states have raced to allow sports betting in their state. As you can see on the map, currently 13 states that are in the green offer some form of sports betting within their state currently. And we also have another 5 states that are in the yellow that they have legislation that has passed, and it's just, it takes time to get things up and running. So ideally, those states in the yellow would hopefully be up and running either by the end of this year or sometime in 2020. So that's 18 states that will have some form of legalized sports betting by the end of next year. But that doesn't include that many other states have some type of bills or legislations that are in their, state legislature to potentially legalize, sports betting. California is one for sure, where they're talking about potentially a bill on the market in 2020 to be able to legalize sports betting. New Jersey was the first to go live in June of 2018 after more than just Nevada was legalized sports betting, and they've had over $4 billion in wagers placed since then. So currently, esports betting is legal in both Nevada and New Jersey, as well as you can make bets online in New Jersey for esports. However, that's not up and running yet in Nevada. They don't Online betting is not as big as it is in New Jersey. The chart on the left shows the number of events that esports have grown with over the past few years. In 2015, there was around 4,700 events, and that has grown steadily to 2019, where it is expected that over 9,200 esports events will happen during the calendar year. And to kind of put that in a little bit of perspective, the NFL only has about 530 games each year that a person could make a wager on. Now, while not all 9,200 events would be something that a legal wager could be placed on, it does show that the scale at which esports could happen from betting wise, as long as more states start to legalize it. So it might not be 9,200, it might be 1,000 or so, or just depending on whatever big events there are. But the scale is there to be able to offer lots of events for betting purposes. And then one other kind of thing to talk about on the stats to the right, though, the one that says 60% of U.S. esports fans use fantasy betting sites. Hardcore viewers are 3 times likelier than casual fans. So a lot of intersect, a lot of cross, from the betting, to the fantasy and esports viewers. Now, when we think about esports and sports betting, there's a few options for someone to make a sports bet. You can bet on a single match within a tournament for who will win that match. You can also bet on who would be the winner of the tournament before it starts. So like how somebody might bet on a team to win the World Series before the season starts. It would be the same thing. Instead of potentially betting on a team, you'll be betting on a player or so forth. And then the last option would be in-match betting, similar to how it works for other major sports. And I think that's where a lot of the potential will be, is where now, instead of just making a bet and watching it, now while the esports event is going on, you can make bets while it's happening to be able to, potentially, if one person you think is doing well, you can bet the other side, vice versa. But the ability, now you're going to be interacting, connecting during that event via sports betting, where before you really didn't have that option.